And there's something else that you said to me when we were preparing that I'd love to get your reactions. You said, if a company's change plan
Mm,
doesn't have a grief component, you only have a communication plan. So
right.
say more.
Right. Yeah. So I learned that one. I learned that one the hard way through some changes that I implemented when I was in the workforce, having to shut down plants and some other things. Right. Huge change events in people's lives. So it gets back to this. It gets back to this notion of. In fact, it's interesting, right? So we've chosen an elephant head as our logo, and the reason is because grief has always been the elephant in the room
Mm,
that no one wants to address, right? That no one even wants to acknowledge, right? Um, and I really, I guess I really should say emotion has always been the elephant in the room that no one wants to acknowledge. We now have a name for it, right? It's always been grief, but to your point, it's now suddenly, because of all of the things that have gone on over the last year and a half, it's now a little safer to actually use grief as the term.
mhm.
But that is what is underlying everything, right? Employee burnout, that is grief because the employment contract that the person signed up for has changed, right? Either their workload has changed or their work hours have changed, and that they feel that it is irreversible, right? That they can never get ahead. They're tired of going home after 12 hours, thinking about their work on the weekends. They're overwhelmed,
Mm.
right? They are grieving. They are going through depression, anger, bargaining, right? Denial. They're going through it all. It's grief, right? We call it burnout because that's a nice way that makes it feel
Well,
sort
it
of
feels very
more
clinical.
professional.
It's a clinical word that
Yes.
it's like I can have a detached reaction to it
Yep.
or I could be in it, but at least I have like a label that's safe.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
And it's your fault, right?
Yes.
You're burned out. I don't have to take responsibility for what has gone on. You burned out,
Mm.
right?
Great point. That's a great
And
point.
so where grief is a little bit of a more impactful, right? Sort of, oh geez, we've created an environment that is causing grief, right? You got to take responsibility for that. And so if your change management plan doesn't acknowledge any of that, it gets back to the conversation that we had a little bit earlier, right? You have the science of change and those models that say people absolutely go through the stages of grief when you announce a change. And then you have the change management models that say, but when you're implementing change, don't ever talk about those things,
Yeah.
right? Then you just have a communication plan. Then you're back to, I'm going to change. Here's the burning platform. If we don't change, right, things are going to get worse. We're not going to be able to compete. In and of itself, a statement that will cause people huge emotions and fear, right? Then we talk about, okay, so, but we have a plan. And boy, once we get through this, even though a third of you are no longer going to be here, for those of you who stay,
Yeah.
boy, is it going to be wonderful because you're going to be so busy and right, you're going to be taking on all these new responsibilities and all this great new learning and all of this stuff. And then we implement the change and then we start holding people accountable. And when those emotions collide with the implementation of the change, performance slips, and then we teach managers how to deal with the performance and we start exiting people out of the organization because they are resistant to change. And the reality is maybe not, right?
Mm,
People aren't resistant to change, they resist being changed, and you need to help them with that, right?
love that. Say that one more time. Say that one more time.
Sure. So people are not resistant to change. They resist being changed.
I love that. I
And the
love that.
leader, the purpose-driven, intentional leader can help people with with that emotion of being changed, right? You need to acknowledge it. But if you don't have the respect for people culture and you don't have the psychological safety in place, the other two circles that we talked
Mm,
about, it it won't work because people won't speak up, and they won't allow you to engage them in those discussions, and they will never be truthful with you, right? Because they're fearful that it's going to come back and haunt them in a
Oh,
performance review, right?
yeah.
Right? That, oh my gosh, your willingness to raise your hand and say I'm struggling with this is now suddenly, I shouldn't say suddenly, is now perceived in your review as a weakness,